The Not So Perfect Pair by starcollectorsilas. Chapter 16. Forcing himself out of bed the next morning was agonizing. Chuuya woke with a pounding headache, instantly shoving his face into his pillow and groaning, covering his ears as though it would solve the issue, laying there for multiple minutes contemplating just going back to sleep. But eventually he picked himself up, exhausted and in pain. He eyed his uniform, then shook his head, giving up and just sighing, deciding to go and eat before he even considered the idea of getting dressed again. He grabbed his hoodie from the chair next to his desk, pulling it over his head as he walked out the door, his steps heavy as he traipsed down the stairs, rubbing his eyes and wincing in the light. But his headache was slowly beginning to ebb away, allowing him to actually think in order to consider what he wanted for breakfast. He opened the cupboard to stare unblinkingly at the various cereals, the idea of eating something extremely unappealing. He just sighed and closed the cupboard instead, grabbing an apple from the bowl of fruit on the counter, opening a drawer and grabbing a knife, not bothering with a plate as he cut the apple into slices on the counter, eating a piece as he finished. He paused to pick another bit to eat, and his eyes flicked to the knife again, trying to ignore the way his chest constricted, looking away pointedly. He was quick as he took the knife and wiped it clean over the kitchen sink, putting it away before he ate another piece, ignoring the shake of his head. It took him a few more minutes to finish the slices of apple, and he wiped the juice from the counter and put the core in the bin, feeling a little better now that he'd eaten and woken up properly. He was still tired, but he should be able to make it through school. As he went to go back to his room, he paused, spotting his parents in the living room, sitting on the couch, talking quietly, their tones hushed and worried. He cautiously stepped into the room, and they looked at him expectantly, as though waiting for him to say something. When he didn't, he just loitered in the doorway uncomfortably, the weight of all the secrets he had been keeping heavy on his shoulders. His mother smiled gently and held out a hand to coax him into the room. "Good morning, sweetheart. Did you sleep well?" she asked as Chuuya stepped forward, standing in the room in his pajamas and hoodie, feeling uncomfortable in a way he had never before. He had never been uncomfortable or scared around his parents. It wasn't something he could understand for the longest time, how a child could feel unsafe with their parents. He couldn't imagine the feeling of something crawling up his spine, the way his palms were sweating, the nausea in the pit of his stomach at the sight of his parents sitting together on the couch. The feeling was unpleasant and horrifying, something he wished he had the luxury of not having experienced. He's been thrown off or upset over something his parents have done, but above all else, he has never been scared of them. He wouldn't call this fear necessarily. He didn't want to disappoint them. And realistically, he knows they won't be disappointed, but he doesn't want to scare them either. He doesn't want them to have to worry. But they're his parents. That's their job. He took a deep breath, a movement in the doorway catching his eyes. He made eye contact with Koyo, who looked at him with an expression of veiled concern, pointedly glancing at their parents before she closed the door and turned to leave. "Chuuya," his father started, sounding worried. "You can tell us anything. You know that, right? We're here when you need us, when you want us, and when you don't want us to." Chuuya turned back to them, eyes searching their worried and open expressions as he hesitated, not sure what to do. They were his parents. If anyone was going to love him unconditionally, it would be them. They are supposed to be willing to help him with anything, to put him and his siblings first where possible. Moreover, they were adults. He turned 16 less than a month ago. They could handle the truth. I know that, he said after a moment, playing with the cuff of his jumper sleeve, not meeting their eyes. He heard his mother hum, and then she spoke. You've been sleeping a lot recently. I don't think I've seen you without a hoodie on since your birthday. Is there something going on? She prodded gently. Chuuya sighed and then he nodded, trying to organize his thoughts into words, and then spoke quietly. Yeah, there's a lot going on, he said, taking a deep breath, figuring out where to start. On my birthday, I got my soulmate mark, he continued, refusing to look at his parents, staring at the floor. But my soulmate, he isn't okay. He's really not okay, he said, and his mother reached out, taking one of his hands, and she pulled him to sit on the couch between his parents. He could have melted from his relief, instantly comforted as he was pressed tightly into the space between his parents, like he was a child again, staying up past his bedtime, watching a movie he probably shouldn't be because he pleaded enough to be allowed to watch it. Take your time, we've got all day. His mother said softly, brushing his hair behind his ear. He nodded, pausing for a moment. The contrast to how he acted with his siblings and friends to his parents was drastic. He was frequently loud and boisterous, and he enjoyed causing trouble. But like this, with his parents, he was content to just sit quietly, ready to curl up and sleep. He didn't know what he'd do without them. My soulmate is injured, all the time. There hasn't been a single day since my birthday where I hadn't had marks. He does it to himself. He's been hurting himself repeatedly, and I don't know how long for. He said slowly, explaining as best as he could, drawing his knees into his chest. He saw his parents exchange worried glances, but they didn't say anything, waiting for him to continue. He tried to kill himself. His parents didn't react the way he expected them to. There was no surprised gasps, no claims of concern or anger, just a hand on his shoulder from his father and a sigh from his mother. That's not your fault. There is nothing you can do about it. Not right now. Right now, our concern is you. How are you feeling about it? His father said, squeezing his shoulder slightly. Chuuya shrugged and swallowed. I don't know. I try not to think about it. I get really worried about it sometimes. I get sad and upset, and honestly, I'm angry about it, and I don't know why. He said, trying to figure it out as he went. He hadn't actually really thought about it. He didn't try to figure out what exactly he was feeling, just that he was, and that he wasn't liking it much. I got really upset over it, to the point where I just almost felt numb. And my soulmate, he's been hurting himself, and a lot. And I got to a point where I just thought, hey, he's doing this a lot. It must help a little, right? So it made sense that it would help. His mother tensed up next to him and took his hand, looking at him carefully, meeting his gaze. Chuuya, it made sense that what would help? She asked gently. Chuuya felt his throat go dry, and he struggled to find his words for a moment. Cutting myself, he said like he was ashamed of it. His mother's grip on his hand tightened, but her expression and tone stayed as calm as possible, keeping it soft. Oh, honey, she whispered, cupping his face with her hand and brushing her thumb over his cheek. Are you all right? Do we need to see a doctor? Have you done it more than once? She asked, and Chuuya shook his head. No, I only tried it once. It was really bad. I hated it. It made me feel sick, and it really hurt. And actually still kinda does. And I never want to do that again. He said quickly, his voice breaking a little. Okay, that's good. Please, if you ever feel like that again, come and talk to us," his mother said, a little desperation slipping into her tone. "We would never want you to have to struggle on your own. You shouldn't have to feel like you can't talk to us about this stuff." Chuuya nodded and he took a shuddery breath, unsure how to continue. "I have a question," Chuuya's father said cautiously, drawing the attention. "Your soulmate, Dazai?" he asked, looking like he truly expected a nod of confirmation. Chuuya blinked, and then again. He sat in dumbfounded silence, staring at his father. It was one thing for his friends to joke about it, but his father? "No, I hate that mackerel bastard. Why the fuck would he be my soulmate?" he said, lacking his normal bite, sounding rather miserable about it instead. His mother sighed, shaking her head. "You two make that hard to believe when you're sitting cuddled on your bed watching movies or something similar," she said, smiling slightly, just trying to wind him up now. Chuuya huffed, sitting back and crossing his arms with a scowl. "Not my fault he's the clingy type. He's not my soulmate." He paused and went quieter. Whether I wanted him to be or not. Saying it out loud made the nausea in his gut double. He hadn't wanted Dazai to be his soulmate, but he's come to a horrifying reason that maybe he wouldn't have minded it if he was. To his horror, he sniffed and wiped his cheek, his hand coming away wet, staring at the glistening streak on his hand where the light reflected off the smudged tear. He didn't know what to do with that. Why was he feeling like this? He wasn't supposed to. He doesn't like Dazai. But there was another tear making its way down his face. His father was the first to move, taking his shoulders and pulling him into a hug, holding him tightly like he was a child or like he was fragile, and holding him this tightly would prevent him from shattering. His mother joined in a few moments later, so he was comfortably enveloped by both of his parents, clinging to them tightly, refusing to let his crying become audible, just breathing shakily and staring at the shirt his dad was wearing, trying to think. I think Dazai's dad is hurting him," he said suddenly, unsure where exactly it came from, just spouting it out like fact. His mother sighed, stroking his hair. "I can't say I'd be surprised," she muttered. "I don't trust Mori. There is a reason I suggested you introduce Kyoka to Elise properly. I'd rather she was here than at her home. But without any physical evidence, there is very little we can do aside from encourage him and his sister to spend as much time here as they can." Chuuya's father spoke next, sounding tired. "The fact that Dazai has been neglected should be obvious to any adult who interacts with him. He still gets surprised by simple things that you've experienced your whole life, that seem normal or as a given. Do you remember when he cried for hours after he did that drawing when you two were little and it was put on the fridge? Mori is not a good parent, even if he hasn't actually been hurting Dazai physically." Chuuya couldn't say he remembered that clearly, but he's sure he could remember sitting on the floor with a puzzle while Dazai had sat on the couch with Chuuya's dad and cried. He hadn't remembered what caused it, but that made sense. He felt horrible for not noticing it himself. "Why could I not tell?" he asked, voice scratchy from trying to stay quiet while crying. "You're still a child. It's not your job to notice these things. You're supposed to make friends with who you want, and sometimes those kids are going to have something horrible happening, and sometimes there's nothing you can do, and Dazai is good at pretending." His mother said soothingly, "It's not your fault for Dazai's dad mistreating his children, and it's not your fault because you couldn't tell, or because Dazai didn't tell you. And it's not Dazai's fault for wanting to hide it, or not telling anyone. Chuuya nodded, just unbelievably tired. This was exhausting, and he was already tired. He just wanted to sleep for hours. This was so upsetting. And his parents hadn't even been surprised that he thought Dazai was being hurt. It might be news to them, but they weren't surprised, like they had been expecting it. That was almost worse. His parents didn't move, just talking quietly, so Chuuya stayed still, taking advantage of the warm and comfortable hug he was still trapped in, his exhaustion creeping upon him, dragging him back down to sleep, the same way it had with Dazai a day before. He probably slept for a while before he was stirred by movement, being scooped into his father's arms and carried up the stairs, pretending to still be fast asleep as he was brought back to his bed, and he was tucked into his unmade bed, and the curtains were drawn closed, a kiss placed on his forehead before the door closed, letting him open his eyes slightly and shift to be more comfortable, feeling warm and safe. His head hurt again, but he reached to grab his phone, shooting a message to Dazai and not seeing the reply before he fell back asleep. Tuesday, 13th of April, 9:23. I'm tired. Won't be at school. Your sister came out and told me. Sounds like you need a day off. I hope you sleep well. Dream of me, please. Dazai would like to consider himself rather intelligent, which is not the impression Rampo had seemed to get when he explained his plan at lunch. But Rampo knows nothing, and appeared to be too busy scheming over something for his advice on the matter to be deemed useful. You see, Dazai has a problem, and that is, he's been in love with his best friend for at least 3 years by now. He is well aware of, and has come to terms with, the fact that he will never get over his infuriating crush. However, there is a traitorous part of his brain that still makes him spend his day dreaming about how nice it would be to go to college with Chuuya, and maybe university, and then move somewhere together and settle down in a cottage somewhere quiet, where Chuuya can write and he can draw, and they can breathe. But for multiple reasons, this will never happen. Reasons including his current plan to not be alive by the end of the year, Mori's plan to throw him into the medical field, and the fact that whatever plan Chuuya has likely doesn't involve little domestic fantasies where they can have their own family and a cat and a strawberry plant sitting outside of the windowsill. Yet as he gathered, he needs to do something about his crush before he can move on with his life. Ideally, even if he can't be with Chuuya, he might manage to find some red-headed girl with blue eyes who is competitive and loud enough to catch his attention, and he can move on with his life when Chuuya inevitably decides to move on with whichever boyfriend he gets. But first, he needs to get rejected. Or he needs to find a way to ensure that Chuuya tears down these stupid starry daydreams before they ruin his life. So, enter his plan. He's going to flirt with Chuuya, not majorly, just enough to push Chuuya to tell him to fuck off until Chuuya gets a boyfriend, or until Chuuya pointedly starts asking about when Dazai is going to get a girlfriend. When that happens, Dazai can then cry a little, eat shit tons of ice cream and watch 10 Things I Hate About You for the 50th time, and then move on and pretend he doesn't still want Chuuya with every part of his soul. He wanted to say that the text message had been carefully planned, but it hadn't. He had simply typed his first thoughts, cringed, added a little face to make it less serious, and sent it. Chuuya hadn't responded. But when he showed up at Chuuya's door after school, he was let in by Chuuya's parents, who offered him something to eat, which he politely refused, and then let him go up to Chuuya's room. When he opened Chuuya's door, his bag in hand, Chuuya was sitting up on his bed, his laptop open with something playing. He was still in his pajamas, But he didn't have his hoodie in like he always had when he was here. Dazai decided not to ask and just came in, putting his bag down and stretching, making himself comfortable on the bed next to Chuuya, not even asking first. Chuuya raised an eyebrow, but shifted, and he moved the blanket to allow Dazai to slip under it as well. "I wasn't sure you were going to come over," Chuuya said, pausing the show he was watching. "I'll always come over. I'd rather be here than anywhere else," he said, shifting to make himself comfortable, leaning against Chuuya. Chuuya looked at him, tilting his head a little, smiling. "Well, I doubt there's anything I could do to keep you out, so I don't think there's much point in trying." Dazai laughed a little, meeting Chuuya's gaze. "There isn't. You're right. I'll be everywhere, forever. You'll never be able to see a boy with brown hair without thinking of me ever again. Have I ruined Strawberry for you?" Dazai asked teasingly, grinning. Chuuya just rolled his eyes and shoved Dazai away. "No, you haven't ruined Strawberry, because I don't mind thinking of you whenever I smell it." Dazai blinked for a moment, his cheeks warming, before quickly changing the subject. "Did you get my message earlier?" he asked curiously. "You never responded." "I didn't think it warranted a response. You were wishing nightmares on me." "By telling you to dream of me?" "What else? Any dream with you would be a nightmare," Chuuya said, turning his face away to avoid letting Dazai see the pink on his cheeks. Dazai sighed melodramatically and whined. "No, it wouldn't. It would be paradise. I'm amazing," he said, and Chuuya just sighed, moving to change what he was watching. "Spider-Man?" he asked, not waiting for an answer, which he knew would be a yes, before pressing play. Dazai practically squealed in excitement, shifting to be more comfortable in the bed, attention shifting to the movie immediately. Chuuya, for all he tried to pay attention, had his attention constantly drawn back to Dazai. The room was dark, so Dazai's face was lit only by the flashing lights from the screen, but he looked pretty and kind of tired. After a moment of subtle staring, Dazai ended up glancing at him, smiling widely. "Staring problem?" he asked teasingly, and Chuuya shook his head, but still didn't look away. Dazai ended up looking back at Chuuya closely as well, at the redness under his eyes which made it look like he had been crying, and at the hair falling across his face. His breath caught, and hesitantly, despite his usual internal alarm telling him not to do stuff like this, he reached out, brushed Chuuya's hair back, hand loitering a little longer than was necessary. Chuuya looked back at him with wide eyes and flushed cheeks, his mouth slightly open. Suddenly, Dazai pulled away, moving so he just lay next to Chuuya, holding on to his arm. Chuuya cleared his throat, looking away, the movie suddenly managing to catch his attention. Dazai was cursing himself internally, furious at getting flustered by his own attempts at shitty flirting, while Chuuya's brain exploded repeatedly, screaming at him. Neither knew what to make of what had just happened. Until Dazai frowned, his fingers on Chuuya's arm brushing against something he hadn't noticed. He sat up and turned Chuuya's arm, looking at the single red line on his inner arm with confusion, his eyebrows furrowed and dread pulling in his stomach. "Chuuya? What happened here?" Dazai asked, glancing at his face, and Chuuya paled, pulling his arm back. "Shit, I took the plaster off the shower last night. Sorry." He apologized instead of actually answering. "Don't apologize. What happened?" Dazai asked, frowning and looking at him worriedly. He recognized that kind of injury. "It doesn't matter. I'm not gonna do it again," Chuuya said defensively, angling his arm away from Dazai. "No, it does matter. When did you do that to yourself?" Dazai asked, sounding panicked and above all, guilty. "Yeah, I did, but I'm not gonna do it again. It was stupid. I was just upset," Chuuya said back, raising his voice. He didn't understand why Dazai was so upset over it, no less guilty. Dazai felt sick, the guilt churning in his stomach like it was trying to crawl up his throat. Was it because of me, your soulmate? Did he give you the idea to do that? Dazai asked, his eyes wide. Chuuya shook his head adamantly. It's not his fault. It's my own responsibility not to do stupid shit like this because other people are doing it. But you wouldn't have done it if your soulmate wasn't a problem? Dazai argued. Chuuya hesitated and scowled. Yeah, fine. I wouldn't have done it if my soulmate hadn't been doing it, because I wouldn't have thought of it. He snapped, sounding hurt. Happy now? It was one cut. It's not the end of the world. Dazai faltered and fumbled. One cut usually doesn't stay one cut. One cut will be how your soulmate ended up like this, Dazai said, pointing at the blue lines on Chuuya's arms. One turns into two, which turns into two more, until it's ruined your life and body. Dazai continued, getting increasingly upset. I'm not gonna do it again, Chuuya yelled in frustration. I'm not a child, and I'm not my soulmate. Sure, my soulmate can't break the habit, but I'm not gonna make it a habit in the first place. Dazai blinked a few times, looking hurt and worried, and still looking guilty. Then he took a deep breath and looked back at the movie, which they hadn't stopped. Yeah, sorry, I was just worried. Chuuya sighed and crossed his arms, looking away, slightly uncomfortable and confused about why Dazai reacted like this. It's fine. Sorry, I hadn't meant to cover it, he muttered. It's fine. Dazai sat back just as quietly. Chuuya took a moment, then shifted to lay back down again, just focusing on the movie. Dazai lay with him again, so they were pressed together, not hugging or anything, just in contact. Neither made it to the end of the movie, passing out asleep, both upset and tired. Chuuya only woke up after Dazai had left. His laptop moved to his desk, closed and charging. He sat up, realizing how hungry he was and rubbing his eyes. He'd be awake for a while now after sleeping most of the day. Then his eyes landed on his chair. On it, the hoodie Dazai had been wearing, and then, on top of the hoodie, a little card drawing, a bouquet of flowers, roses and tulips. He got up and went over, picking up the card and admiring it. He sighed and ran his hand through his hair, his cheeks warming as he looked back at the hoodie. Oh, he's fucked. Terrible plan, Dazai. Terrible plan. Too tired for a proper end note, so let's default to the usual. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. Don't forget to send kudos to the author through the link in the description. Also, if you'd like to request any fics, YouTube community tabs are now open for you to post, aside from Tumblr. And if you'd like to show more support, I'm available on Ko-fi, and Super Thanks is now available. Hope you have a great week. Till next time.